Welcome to Talking Out Your Glass. I'm Sean Wagoner. Richard Marquis began blowing glass in 1965, back in the dip and drip days. He humbly describes himself at that time as one of the people who could actually make things, with skills acquired first in ceramics, then naturally transitioning to glass. At the University of California, Berkeley, Marquis was inspired by Giorgio Morandi's paintings of little objects and Ken Price's abstract shapes constructed from fired clay. Marquis knew early on that he needed to travel to Italy in order to master murrine making, which in the U.S. was demonstrated in books only. What he didn't know was that he would become responsible for sharing the process with the rest of the world, giving birth to its international presence. The combination of his amazing mastery of the murrine and glassblowing processes with his whimsical and often humorous aesthetic makes Richard Marquis's work some of my favorite in glass. If he were a musician, Marquis would be a cross between Neil Young and Warren Zevon, beloved for the unique beauty of their perception and revered for their ability to express and understand things other people don't, can't, or choose not to. Welcome to the show, Dick. Let's start at the beginning and talk about when you entered the University of California, Berkeley to study architecture. There you ended up studying ceramics with legends Peter Voulkos, Ron Nagel, and Jim Melchert. Talk about those early days and influences in ceramics.
I went to Berkeley to, one reason was to study with Pete Voulkos because I was interested in ceramics in high school, and I knew about him. And I went up there and enrolled in architecture because I thought it was a way to make money, being an architect as opposed to a potter, or the other choice that was given to me was a forest ranger. So anyway, I studied architecture for a little while, but I took ceramics. And after a little while, a year or so, I shifted into the department that ceramics was in. That had Voulkos. That was the deck art department. Jim Melchert was in art department. Ron Nagel was around. So that was my big influence. And while I was doing ceramics, they just happened to open up the glass program, like probably 64 or 65. I don't know. Around then, and that was like upstairs from ceramics, and that was when they invited Littleton to come out because they were trying to get some things going in the department, and he said he couldn't make it, but his student Marvin could, so that's how Marvin came out. After a year, I went out and built my own shop because it was easier to work in my own shop than at the school, and then from there, I just got better and. I had a lot of early recognition because I was one of the first people who could actually make things, and I think that all comes from having been doing ceramics. I knew how to make things, and transposing them from ceramics to glass was not that big a deal.
How did your background with ceramics affect the way you worked with and thought about glass, though?
The approach was to do things in ceramics. You have to have all the stuff together. You have to have the equipment. You have to have the material, the machines, the kilns, that sort of stuff. In glass, it's the same thing. You need the material. You need the furnaces, the annealing ovens, and I had that approach already. I knew how to set things up. I knew how to weld, I knew how to woodworking, I could do some electrics, So I had these skills that I could do all the physical stuff about it. The process was familiar when I got to glass. Even though it was a different material, I sort of knew I knew what steps would need to be taken, and I knew what steps for me that I had to take to get better, that I had to do certain things to get better. And the things I made at the time were pretty similar in both materials because I was just working on the same forms, and I was interested in, the Giorgio Morandi paintings with those nice little objects and stuff. So that's how ceramics influenced my glass.
Talk a little bit about Ken Price and Ron Nagel. What was your relationship with those two, and how did they impact your art?
Ron Nagel was a friend. He's a little older than me, but he was like the techie, the technician in ceramics, and he was making just beautiful things. I was really influenced by Pete Volkas, who was like did monumental things, and he was very heroic, and all the things he made were great, but it just didn't suit me. And Ron did, and through Ron and Pete, I knew about Ken Price. And Ken Price I hold in such high esteem, and I met him a few times, but when I met him I could barely talk. He was just he just had done, I'm talking about mostly his early ceramics, he had just done everything so well and so perfectly that he was just a role model in how to approach things.
What was the basis for your teapot form, and what about that form held your interest for so long?
In ceramics, especially where I was in the Bay Area, you couldn't make ceramic teapots. It was an anathema. It was just like that's if you wanted to do that, you went to the community college or something. And so, but in glass, so in ceramics, I never made any teapots until much later. But in glass, no one really did it because you can't put hot tea in a glass teapot without it, breaking. I'm not counting Pyrex or anything like that. But anyway, so it had these elements, and I got into it. I was teaching at San Francisco State, and one of my students, one of the grads, said, "Could you make me a teapot? You can go pretty loose or pretty wide, and the thing will still look like a teapot." And also, it's a pretty good canvas for patterns and colors and things. It still holds my interest. One of the problems with the teapot is that whenever I make something, say I make something sort of large, and when I'm all done, if I put a teapot on top, it looks better, and that's a problem, that I've tried to fight. But boy, it still looks pretty good. So I'm still dealing with the teapot all these years.
So what was the year you made your first teapot?
It would have been 72, 71, 72, after I came back from Italy.
What defines the funk approach with which your work is associated, and how do you define that term?
It's a really poorly defined term by everybody. There was a big show that Peter Seltz organized at the UC Berkeley Art Gallery, and he called it Funk Art. And it dealt with like Wiley and Manuel Neri, but Pete Volkas was invited, Melcher, they invited Kenny Price and Ron Nagel, and they didn't consider their work funk at all, but they just were interested in being in the show. It was going to have a catalog, so they got in the show. The Funk Art Show was like about a third of what I would call funk art of some of the San Francisco artists and, R. Crumb type. I don't think R. Crumb was in it, but there were those kind of, I can't think of the names now. But then there was like, Kenny Price had stuff in it, and Don Potts, and their stuff wasn't funky at all. It was just in that show. And that whole funk art thing connected with the Bay Area has been sort of pervasive over the decades. And I'm included in that because I make what people call funky things, and people can call things whatever they want, but I don't see them. Some of the stuff I make, I see as the more humorous stuff is pretty funky, but other times I'm pretty concerned with form and color and spaces, like formal considerations. And the title being a funk artist, that's fine. I don't think it means much. Just it more places me in time and a location as it does about my work.
Dick, talk a little bit about assemblage sculpture and how and why you began to use that format artistically.
There's a Monty Python thing that you could get on YouTube about the society of putting things on top of other things. It's from a few years ago, and it's pretty much exactly what I've been involved with. Just I can't help but putting things on top of other things. You should look at the YouTube, and that's where the assemblage thing came. In ceramics, you assemble things by you make different elements, and then you can put them together by putting a slip on and that kind of thing. In glass, unless you've got a good team, and a bunch of skilled people, it's really difficult to make things all hot and stuck together hot. People do it because there's people really good now. But I found it just easier just to glue things together. And I never was very interested in being a purist. I admire purists who deal in glass the classic ways, but it was never that big an interest. So I put things together.
That was your inroad to working with Thurman Statham, someone who you kind of think of as a psychic twin.
Yeah. So the thing about Thurman, I met him. We had a show together in L.A. It was Dale Thurman, Dick Weiss, and I at this gallery in L.A. And I met him, and we got along fine. I was teaching at UCLA, and I invited him to come and make stuff at the school, and he did. And it ends up that we were the same person. We worked exactly the same way in terms of like neither one of us had fear of what we were doing or where it was going. We worked fast. We didn't measure anything, so we worked together like a hand in glove. And I love the guy. Dealt with him for many years. I mean, I'm still, we're still best friends. And the things we did were based much more on his work, large scale sculpture using, mostly flat glass found objects. And but I learned a lot. It was really great. We called it hard fun, and he's still sort of doing those things, which I find pretty impressive because they're hard to do.
In Tina Oldknow's book, she quoted you as saying that you chose glass because it was the hardest and most interesting. What did you mean by that?
I've always been attracted to things that are hard to do, challenging, and glass was very challenging. It just had all this stuff. Plus, you had to deal with poisons. You had to deal with asbestos and refractories, which I loved all that part of it. Just the difficulty factor. I don't know if that makes sense, and I still like that part about it. I like having to get all set up and figuring things out and how to get the colors and all that. I still appreciate all that, and in the old days I had to learn all about the chemistry. I had to make my own glasses and colors and stuff before we discovered there was already an industry that provided, nice colors and glass. But in the old days, that stuff didn't exist, or we didn't know it existed. So I found that interesting. I used my sort of science skills, and I always had really good eye-hand coordination. I could make things. That's, I think, and glass was challenging. I found it much more interesting than drawing or painting or woodworking or cloisonne.
On your website, I was looking at your bio, and you have a chronology on there, and it seems like whatever dog you had during these decades was just as important as some of your artistic accomplishments. Can you talk about that a little bit, about your love of dogs and how they have impacted your life?
Yeah, I went over this with my wife about, here's the question, why do I love dogs? And she said, ask her if she's ever had a cat. I mean, we have cats too, but no, dogs have always been in my life, and all the dogs I've had have been great. I mean, some of them were world famous dogs just from being such characters, and they're just I don't know. I've always had dogs. I just they're great.
But you didn't mention the cats on your bio.
Yeah. No, we have an old house cat, Buck, now, and then we have a feral cat, Larry, who lives out in the sheds. So yeah, we're dogless right now. We're due for a dog.
We'll be right back with more of part 1 of my interview with Richard Marquis. If you have questions or comments for myself or for Dick, email me at editor@glassartmagazine.com. Two great books on the work of Dick Marquis include the 1997 monograph by Tina Oldknow called Richard Marquis Objects. Also in 2007, author Barry Burstock was inspired to write his book, The Way of the Artist, Reflections on Creativity and the Life, Home, Art, and Collections of Richard Marquis. You can find the accompanying article on the artist in Glass Art Magazine's May-June 2016 issue, available at www.glassartmagazine.com. Now back to our conversation with Dick. Let's just move on to 1969, when you took your trip to Italy and you worked at a variety of Murano glassworks. Talk about your murrine process and your responsibility for its international presence.
I knew I was going to go to Italy. It was just like, because I looked at books. I went to the library and I looked at stuff, and Italian glasses, so I knew I was on my way to Italy. So I started taking Italian at the university, and then I applied for the grant, and I was going to go there whether I got the grant or not. So they gave me this grant, which made it easier. And I already knew about murrine and millefiori, which is what it was called. You know, it's from first century Roman and even pre-dynastic Egyptian they made things. So I knew about it, and I knew how it was made, mostly from poorly written and illustrated English books about how the Englishmen thought the Italians did it, which is, you know, it was close, but it wasn't. They made it much more complicated than it actually is. So I knew all about that when I went to Italy, and I actually just went to one factory for a while because I liked all the colors and I liked where it was, and that didn't work out. So then I ended up at the Venice factory, and they were great. They pretty much gave me carte blanche to just move around and do things. I helped them by doing time motion studies and figuring efficiency, that kind of thing. And I just watched them make things. And then I had sometimes I could work in the shop sometimes. I'd be given an assistant, and every once in a while I'd be giving a full team to make things. And so I learned how to do that in a practical way, as opposed to the theoretical way which I'd read in books about how it was done. And when I left, I shared all that information. That's one thing. The glass is always the glass masters, maestros, are known for keeping secrets and stuff. But that's all been changed. You know, I learned all this stuff. People thought I was giving away secrets, but you know, technique just has to be, everybody should have access to the same knowledge and the same technique, and then see what they do. A lot of people, you know, I haven't been copied or anything very much, because stuff is not only sort of personal that I make, but it's also hard to do. A lot of people just think, oh, well, I show them how to do it, and they said, oh, never mind. It's too much trouble. It's too much trouble. So anyway, I did spread it around, and you see it everywhere now. And it's no big deal. Everybody should know how to do that.
Discuss your incorporation of the American flag in your early artworks.
I was in Berkeley in the 60s. Free speech movement, Mario Savio, all that. So that stuff it wasn't history like it is now. It was a current. And when I ended up in Italy in '69, Berkeley was still pretty much with me. That was a big part of me. And then here I am in this factory that can melt all these compatible colors. They had white, blue, and red, plus another 20 colors. And I thought, it would be so simple. I mean, it'd be so easy. Here's my chance to make, you know, American flag. All I have to do is make a star mold, make stars, and that's what I did. It was just sort of like an obvious thing to do. It's only political because of using that pattern in objects. And also the one when I made the pills, that was sort of a statement because I call them acid capsules, which is, because there's a whole drug thing going on and very antisocial commentary. No, I wasn't on the streets anymore. I wasn't rebelling. I was just making things. And I mean, and after all, the Stars and Stripes is one of the best patterns ever. I mean, the Americans got lucky with their flag. We could have had the Italian flag or the Belgian Congo flag, which are pretty boring flags. So it's just that pattern.
But your use of the F word in a piece, you knew that would get some kind of reaction.
Yeah. Well,
maybe more social than political.
Yeah. No, I knew what I was doing. I figured out I could make letters. People made letters before, and so that was the first word I made because it's the number one word. I only had to make 3 letters because the C and the U are the same. So I did that. And in the factory, the Italians were sort of puzzled and kind of they were very encouraging, but kind of puzzled about what I was doing, and they always thought they didn't know what fuck meant. They only heard it as fuck you from the tourists. So they always thought it was fuck you. They didn't know it was one word.
In 1978, you were awarded your second NEA grant to develop your Fabricated Weird series. In Tina's book, she tells that it's your favorite series. Can you describe the work and talk about why it's your favorite?
It was the first time. Well, there were all these space-age glues. There were anaerobic glues, Loctite glues, really good epoxies, and it was the first time you could put things together and be reasonably sure they stay together. And it was the first time I started using found objects in my work. I've always collected things. I have lots of collections, including really, salt and pepper shakers and glass toys, lots of things. So they're always in my studio, in my shop, and it was just pretty natural for them to start coming into my work. And so those fabricated things, they were the first time that I sort of encompassed my surroundings with what I was doing. Yeah, they're still pretty nice things. I look at them. But and the things I make now, or the things I made the last 15, 20 years, they still are fabricated. But they're not put together so fastidiously with grinding and polish and stuff like that. Now they're more put together with really good silicones and sometimes hextals. But they're still fabricated, but not in the same sense as those were, which those were like ground and polished to fit perfectly, and that kind of precision, which I can't do now. I don't want to do now.
Talk about the secret to successfully incorporating humor into your art. I would think that would be a little bit tricky because it could be read as kitschy, or maybe the humor isn't understood. What's the key ingredient to making that work for the viewer?
Well, you have to have humor. I mean, the artist has to have humor. That's I'm a humorous person. I find things humorous and funny, and it'd be like I could have been a stand-up comedian, except I can't stand being in front of an audience. But you can't make humorous work unless you're a humorous person, and if you're not, then don't try. Otherwise, it'll come off odd or kitschy or a joke. But I've been doing it for so long the work is still, it's humorous, but it's still, you have to look, if you look beyond the humor, there's a lot of formal considerations, form, color, shape, spaces, and the humor if the piece is strong enough and interesting enough, then it can stand the humor. If it's just about humor, then that's a different piece, and there's that's not necessarily wrong, but I can't help but put humor in because that's who I am.
Thanks for tuning in to part 1 of my interview with Richard Marquis. Follow us on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Pinterest. For questions or comments, email me at editor@glassartmagazine.com. For back issues and more information, go to our website, www.glassartmagazine.com. Till next time, stay glassy.